First, a couple housekeeping rules. If you haven't joined us before, welcome. The way we like to have these webinars is it's a fully participant webinar. We ask that you ask questions throughout the entire webinar. The best way to do it is through your dashboard here on the right. Go ahead and click on the raised hand, if you want to audibly make your question, or you can write your questions in the question section here, and we will be answering them throughout the webinar. I'm going to hand this off to our presenter, Bernie Horn. Bernie, can you hear me?
I can, and you can hear me?
Yes, I can.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you, Michael. So today we're going to talk about politically astute legislation for 2018. I'm Bernie Horn. I'm the the senior director for policy and communications at the Public Leadership Institute, and this is our website. Almost everything that I say is on the website in one place or another. That's publicleadershipinstitute.org. Our main products for progressive policymakers and advocates are, first, Voicing Our Values, which is our messaging book. It's both on the website, either in HTML text, or you can download the entire book as a PDF, or if you want to have a nice book, you can buy it on Amazon. We actually sell quite a number of them. A new product for 2017 is the book Preparing to Win, which is it's a book about how to be a good advocate, mostly aimed at state and local groups that do advocacy in state legislatures and city councils and county councils, walking you through all the various steps to have the most effective impact when lobbying. We also have the Playbook for Abortion Rights, which is now almost 2 years old, and it contains 29 different model bills for abortion rights. We have a few other bills on the website, but you can get this either, like the other two books, you can either go on our website, read the text, or download a PDF. In this case, we don't sell it on Amazon, but if you want a printed copy, contact us and we'll send you one. And this is what we're really talking about today. It's our brand new progressive agenda for 2018. This is what the cover looks like. We're going to be passing out printed copies starting at the very beginning of January, and we will have we'll have copies that you can get online in a few days, maybe even tomorrow. This is what it looks like inside. So there are 12 different issue areas. This one's consumer protection. On the left side, it describes what constitutes a good progressive government. I mean, what would be the consumer protection policies in a progressive locality or state? They're described on the left, and each time that there is language that is highlighted, in this case it's a gold color, that text is a hyperlink to model legislation. On the right is specific featured policies for 2018, and again those link to model legislation on our website. So we're going to be talking about the featured policies, or some of the featured policies that are coming out in this year's progressive agenda for 2018. So we're going to have a two-part discussion. The first part is why. Most people are in jurisdictions where they can't pass proactive progressive legislation. So why do this? Why introduce it? Why push for it? And second, we'll go over examples in three categories. One is stuff that's very popular, terrific politics, even rather obvious politics. Second is legislation which is not unpopular, but it's mostly designed to energize the progressive base. And the third is what I'm calling bipartisan legislation, but I'm not sure there's anywhere that you can pass legislation bipartisan anymore. But it's more modest legislation which is not so partisan. If you were a lawmaker at the state or local level, you should have some of each of these. You should be introducing some highly popular, some to energize the base, some bipartisan. We'll give examples of each. So I'll start with the first part, and that is about why you should do this. The first thing I want to say is that we're in a desperate situation politically, with the right wing controlling the entire federal government and doing their utmost to destroy all of our values, not just the values of progressives, of fairness and equity, but they're trying to destroy representative government and the truth. They're trying to make it impossible for people to know what is true and what is not true. What we need to do is to win the 2018 election like Virginia, but all across the country at both the congressional and the state and local levels. So how do we do that? Well, how can we contribute to that? I mean, there are many, many factors that are going to play into the outcome of the 2018 elections. We're a 501c3 organization. We don't get involved in elections directly, but we can talk about how to shape the debate around election time. Right now, both progressives and conservatives are very angry, but for different reasons. Conservatives think that Obama, liberals, and people of color hijacked their world, which they somehow see as a white world. Progressives are angry about Trump and everything that's happened since the 2016 election and the way that our whole government is being torn apart. But, average Americans can't quite understand why they're angry. They can't quite know what to do about it, and their anger can be misplaced, and they can end up voting for Roy Moore. The most important thing that we have to keep in mind for the coming year is that we, progressives, even those who are incumbents, cannot defend the status quo. Everybody hates the status quo. Everybody does. It's unjustified. There's a lot in government and society that is good, but that's not what the political debate is about today. And we cannot win unless we are agents of change. Hillary Clinton was not an agent of change. Most of the members of Congress who are Democrats, the Democratic incumbents, do not understand the importance of being agents of change. But we're we are not going to win defending the status quo. Everybody thinks that the system is rigged. Now, progressives think that it's the rich who are rigging the system, and conservatives think that it's people of color and liberals and, quote, the government, unquote. Here's a sad poll. When asked who they think is more responsible for rigging the system, voters say by 2-to-1 that it's more the government than the rich. Now, you know, obviously that's because they just don't understand how things work. But it's a problem. It's a political problem. So the only way we can be for change is to push for proactive legislation. You know, opposition to the right-wing horrors is not going to be enough, because it's not going to show that we're for change. It's not going to show that we oppose the status quo. We have to be proactive. Proactive does a number of things for us. Proactive means to put in your own legislation, your own policy, your own ideas, and talk about them in addition to opposing the conservative ideas, but to try to focus as much attention as possible on how we want to change the government. One of the ways that proactive helps is that it frames the debate. You know, the right wing has a history of framing the debate. Right now, the tax legislation in Congress, they're framing it as lowering taxes. And we all know that it's going to dramatically lower taxes on the rich. It may lower taxes on some middle income people. It's going to increase taxes on everybody else. Everybody should be thinking of this bill as tax giveaways to the rich. I mean, that's exactly what it is. That's factual. But that's not how it's framed. And I don't think that most Americans even understand that. And much of the reason is that Democratic leaders in Congress haven't really said it in a way that people are going to hear. So each issue that you take on proactively, you have the chance to frame what the debate is about. So the debate is, you know, let's say relief for college debt, that the bad guy here is the companies that are jerking around students and graduates who have this tremendous college debt, as opposed to, let's say, the students are at fault for taking those loans, or, you know, whatever the right wing might want to say. You know, in the area of abortion, the other side wants to frame this not just as a question of life, but also as a question of waiting periods and the health of the mother, and, you know, 100 different proactive bills that the opponents of abortion throw out there at the state level, and we need to, you know, take it back. And the same is true of all these issues. So the way to do it is to introduce your own legislation. The second advantage to proactive is that it forces opponents to take a position. You know, what we need to do is to put positive ideas out there and make our opponents come out against it, so that we can talk about that in an election year. I mean, if we don't put our popular ideas out there, we can't hold them accountable. Proactive helps you build your coalition. You know, progressives have a tremendous core of supporters at the grassroots, and that was made obvious during the women's marches at the beginning of the year. But, you know, in order to mobilize those people, you have to give them something real to do. And most of them don't have anything real to do because they live in a congressional district where it just doesn't make any difference whatsoever if they complain or not. There's just no way of changing the mind of their representatives to Congress. But if we have positive legislation at the state and local level, it gives them something real to advocate for, and keeps them active and builds our strength. And proactive shapes how the media covers the debate. You know, the media, the reporters who cover politics are not the brightest political consultant types, and they will repeat what they're told. And the other side tells them what they want to tell them. They tell them that, you know, certain legislation is important in the upcoming election, and they will cover the issue as if that is true. And then, you know, during the election campaign, they will talk about where the candidates stand on those issues that the conservatives have set up as the key issues. We have to set up our issues as the key issues. We have to make the media understand that that's what they should be covering. That's what the voters want to hear. That's what they need to hear. That's what they need to write about. And I want to make one more point, and then I'm going to go to questions. And then after questions, we'll go down the issues one by one. And the point is, sadly, sad point. This is the upcoming year is an election year. Persuadable voters, that is the people who are not in the conservative or progressive base, they want legislation that helps them or their family or their friends, but they want to see it helping them directly. This is not a time to be calling for policy for the common good. You know, this is not a time to persuade voters based on the idea that we're all in this together. That's not what's persuading people today, I'm sorry to say. Maybe it persuaded people before, but no more. We have to put policy out there that we can argue this is going to help you, and explain to them how it does. And that's how we capture the debate in an election year, and how we create the conditions where people can understand that the progressives are the ones that are on their side and the conservatives are the ones that are not on their side. Okay, so I'm going to take a pause here for questions. As Michael said, you know, you can type the questions in and they can be read on the air, or you can signal to. Was that Dave?
This is Dave. Yes, I'm here. I'm here. I'm sorry I was tardy, but yes, wait in the wings here. So I can help still. Here's my in. Okay. No, I apologize for being tardy here. But yeah, as Bernie said, like, this is really, I mean, these sessions are most valuable when people can really ask their questions, get the most out of it, and so we want this to be as interactive as possible. So type your questions in the question bar if you're in a place that you can't ask your question directly, or raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on your control panel, and we will take those questions as they come up. We have a question here from Joe. how do we get like Trump's base on our side to get persuade their Republican elected officials to start calling for his impeachment and policies that don't help the middle class? So, I mean, I think this is a little bit like I think. Joe, if it's okay, I'm going to add like kind of two prongs to this. There's the Trump voter that voted for Obama in 12 but lost, principally white working class voters. And then maybe the broader base. I mean, is it even worth trying to engage that group? So, Bernie, you want to take a crack at answering both of those?
Yeah. So most of the Trump voters cannot be persuaded, but some percentage of them can, and in order for us to win back America, we have to do that. Those people were not motivated to vote for Hillary Clinton for various reasons, but what I think was the biggest reason is that they identified with the Trump team and did not identify with the Clinton team, and that was mostly a question of identity politics. That is, people who were white thought of Trump as the white team, as the GOP as the white team. And there has been a long effort by the right wing to make people think that. And the fact that, you know, President Obama probably, just by the fact of who he was, probably increased their feelings. We're not going to win those voters by, you know, being bigger racists than Donald Trump. Obviously, we don't want to, and we can't. So we have to reach him a different way. And the only thing I can think of that can work is the economic argument. That is that the right wing and Trump are there for the rich, as they're proving today with the tax bill. That they are never going to help those people who voted for Trump and have no interest in helping them. Their only interest is in helping the rich. And we have to put that across. We can put it across in part with legislation and to force people to you know, to come out in favor of the rich or the general populace. But it's a slow process. I'm not sure that, you know, any of this is going to work before the election itself. I don't, you know, even Senator Collins of Maine, who's supposed to be a moderate, sounds like she's going to vote for this bill to give away everything to the rich. Do you have any thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think the issue frames you talked about, I think it's absolutely imperative that progressive candidates, progressive leaders, progressive organizations start describing what we stand for in the framework that you mentioned. That center to that needs to be a demonstration that it benefits me. How do I benefit me? Like how is my family benefited by raising the minimum wages of other people? Like how do I benefit from that? Financial retirement security, how do I benefit from that? How does my family directly benefit from that? And it's, I mean, really central to like the stuff that you've laid out so far is asking this question: what do we stand for, and how do we improve people's lives as a result of it? How do we improve your life as a result of it? And it's something that progressives struggle with. We can give you a laundry list of issues, even a laundry list of bill ideas, overly complex, all backed by a whole set of facts and statistics that, frankly, anyone who at least believes in science will conclude as, yes, those are accurate facts, but are not very good at communicating what we stand for fundamentally at a visceral and gut level. And I think that your description, using the presidential election, is how it manifested. Like the idea that more progressive candidates win to election cycle, losing the economic argument is shocking. Not by lack of, there's a lack of argument to be made, just a lack of making it, at least when we look at the November 2016 election. So we have another question here, Bernie, from Bob. And Joe, if you want to go a little bit further, feel free to ask follow-up questions. That goes for everybody here. Bob posed the question, are there any points that can be made to show that voter registration will directly support persuadable's interests? Using a democracy frame, a voter rights frame. Bernie, do you want to take a first stab at that?
I think that our best shot is their own convenience in voting. A lot of people have, it's pretty inconvenient for them to vote. So, automatic registration, online registration, making it easier to vote absentee, election day registration, all those things that we're for that are pro-democracy actually do make it more convenient for voters. And even if they're still going to go vote on election day and they're not going to take advantage of any of these things, you can explain to them it's going to shorten the line. If we can get more people voting these alternative ways, it's going to shorten the line for you. So they can see that it benefits them personally. But the more abstract thoughts about democracy do not motivate our voters. They don't get it.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that is, again, using the strategy of how do you directly benefit, the things that make it more convenient, make it easier for you to do it and make your voice heard, are the things that we should definitely lean on. And I think this is also important to realize that this is not about curtailing or dropping policy ideas that improve democracy. This is about leading with the things that, frankly, an audience is willing to listen to you, and to distinguish yourself as being for all of us and not for some of us. And that is, frankly, it's the thing that we have the advantage. I think there's a predisposition that we are much more aligned with values and, frankly, public values and public policy that is good for all of us, rather than the rich and powerful. That it's not a huge jump to be able to talk about our solutions and ideas in a way that demonstrates that in an easily digestible way that makes sense. And this is the thing that, when you're talking to progressive candidates out there, evaluate if they're doing this. I think there's actually two stages. There's the demonstration that what I stand for is good for all of us and good for you, but also presenting their argument as part of this and not talking at you. Both of those things I think have to come in play, but this is, I think, the frame that Bernie's laid out here is, to me it's all so simple. And then when you look at stump speeches and other things from some heroes in the progressive movement, the ones that do it really well, we gravitate very quickly to, but it's not being done enough. And whether you're a city council person, school board member, or someone running for the U.S. Senate, everyone can be doing this. Any other questions that folks have? Bernie, I'm just only because I had this conversation literally earlier today. So minimum wage seems to be something that benefits people at the lowest end of the economic scale. So how do I convince? How do we demonstrate that as a tool that benefits all? Is it a winning issue? Is it a winning economic issue?
Yeah, minimum wage is a great example, and I will list it. But let's talk about it now. Um, there are a few things about minimum wage that make it a terrific political issue. I mean, all you have to do is look at polls, and it's always an excellent issue. But there's some reasons for it. First is, while we think, oh, well, not that many people actually earn the minimum wage, the fact is that the people that you're going to benefit by the increase is far more than the people who currently benefit from get the minimum wage. That is, if you were to raise, let's say that it's currently, like 650 or 7 in your state, and you increased it to 10 or 12, what would happen is you would increase the wages of about 1/4 of your workforce, because although only a small slice actually makes the minimum wage, a huge percentage makes between your minimum wage and 10 or your minimum wage and 12. And it also has a spillover effect for anybody who's making up to $1 more. So if you increase to 10, anybody who's making between 10 and 11 now would also get pushed up, because everyone below them is going to get pushed up to 10. So first of all, although we don't think of it, it really affects a tremendous percentage of the electorate, and a very big percentage of people who either are persuadable or we need them to get out and vote. It's a surprisingly large number. The second thing about the minimum wage that is different than almost every issue is that people understand it. Average people know what the minimum wage is. And Dave, you can speak to this, but when you do a poll and you give our argument, and people are at a certain level, and you give the other side's argument, yeah, it knocks it down, but not very much, because people already understand the minimum wage. You can't really lie about the minimum wage the way conservatives lie about so many other things. So that it's just a very dependable issue.
Right. Absolutely. No, and that's exactly right. I mean, I was directly involved in a past minimum wage. I'm based in Michigan, in a Michigan minimum wage campaign. All the conservative groups, the Chamber of Commerce, everyone was polling, trying to find the message that could help sink it, and they just couldn't. They couldn't figure out a way to message to attack it because it's so overwhelmingly popular. And it's overwhelmingly popular because there's a general value set that if you work full-time, you shouldn't live in poverty. And it is by far the most compelling argument for it. And then but stretching it to, like, how do I benefit? So I earn more than minimum wage. My family earns more than minimum wage. My neighbors down my street mostly earn more than minimum wage. Why is it good for me? You can make the economic arguments that areas with a higher minimum wage have a stronger economy. That's good for everybody. I mean, you don't even have to get too deep into the policy weeds, because for everything Bernie said, it is a demonstration that people already have a general sense of what it is, and they fundamentally in their guts believe in it, that it immediately positions ourselves. And frankly, this is it is an Achilles heel for conservative candidates. Almost none will say they support it. I mean, surprisingly, President Trump actually said we should raise the minimum wage. I mean, you can see that he's taken no extra steps to be able to do that, because his Republican colleagues in Congress almost virtually are opposed to it. And candidates at the local level will naturally just be opposed to it. And that puts, I mean, again, it starts establishing contrast. And we've actually done further research that's demonstrated that it's kind of a litmus test on, well, are you on the side of working people or the side of the rich? It just reinforces. I mean, there's a predisposition that progressive candidates generally are on the side of working people. It demonstrates it in real, tangible terms, and can be a motivating factor. And we've seen this, demonstrated. It can be a motivating factor to get those voters that might otherwise not care, or if they have less than inspiring or aspiration lacking candidates running, that it's an issue that's much more popular. I'll just close out one last thing, that the minimum wage ballot issue is on the ballot last across the country last election outperformed every candidate running for office. 100%, drawing a huge number of conservative voters actually in support of it because they believe in it too, with one exception of one U.S. Senate candidate, Senator Murray out of Washington, that was, I don't know, the co-chair, the leader of the minimum wage ballot initiative in Washington State. She beat it by 1 point. And so, I mean, there's an example. I mean, we've seen situations when candidates start trying to split with it and just demonstrate lack of public support for it, even though the public is overwhelmingly there. And again, I'm not, I guess I'm, yeah, you can see I'm very passionate about this issue, but it is the, I would say the ingredients of it, the fundamentals of this argument is just it's a testament of the stuff that Bernie just laid out in this first segment that demonstrates how we can use an economic frame and some of these other frames to demonstrate who we are, what we stand for, and give us political power and what we will fight for. And that is something that, with all due respect, in the last presidential election, and frankly in too many elections down ballot, is often left off the table. It's more about the letter behind the name, not enough about demonstrating what we stand for, what we're going to fight for. And that's what the session's about.
And let me make one more point about the minimum wages. People don't seem to understand that if you've already increased your minimum wage in a given state or city, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get in there and increase it again. Washington's a good example. They already had a relatively high minimum wage. They increased it. You know, in Michigan, you have a minimum wage of something around $9, and you're talking about increasing it.
Right. Yep. Now we were the last effort rose it from $7.25 to $9.25, and we're talking about raising it upwards of 12 over the next 4 or 5 years.
If your jurisdiction doesn't have at least a $12 minimum wage, raise it. Try to raise it. It's almost the best issue we've got because the other side can't effectively lie about it.
Correct. All right. If anyone has additional questions, type questions in, raise your hand. We'll pause in the next segment. So, Bernie, I wanted to hand the floor back to you.
Okay. So I'm just going to, this is just to set up the economic argument again, why the economic argument is so important. You know, because for the foreseeable future, this is really, I think, the only real way we can push back against the white identity politics is by showing that we're on the side of the middle class and conservatives are on the side of the rich. You know, President John F. Kennedy repeatedly said, a rising tide lifts all boats. And this chart shows that that was true when he said it. From the post-war until the mid-70s, as productivity went up, so did everybody's wages. Everybody benefited from the creation of new wealth. But starting in the 70s and really taking off during the Reagan administration, there was a separation in the creation of wealth, productivity, and who got it. So that average people got almost no benefit from the creation of new wealth from the time of Reagan until today. Almost none of that money went to us. Almost all of it went to the rich. Now, this is not something you can explain to voters, but this helps you understand why they are so frustrated, because you know, just a few decades ago, a person who does not go to college could get a job that could really support their family, and they could get a pension, and they could retire in dignity, and they'd have health insurance, and they'd have paid leave, and they'd have all these things we're arguing about today, and they've all been taken away from them. People are in desperate straits. They have good reason to be frustrated and angry, but they don't know why. This is why. And I'll show one other chart that tells the same story. That was about the production of income, the production of wealth and income. This is about assets. So from 1989 to 2013, and this is the Congressional Budget Office's chart. So I mean, nobody can challenge the accuracy of this. People in the bottom 50% had nothing, and they have nothing now. People who are in the 51st to 90th percentiles of the country have just a little bit more than they had back then, 30 years ago. And the top 10% have doubled their assets. And this is consistent with the the last chart, but people don't understand this. There has been a tremendous transfer of wealth from all of us who create it to a small group of people who have taken it, and now they're taking political power too. So, we cannot explain it with charts, but they can understand it piece by piece. Here's some standard polling about economics. 72% think that the economy is rigged for the rich and powerful. 83% think that there are different rules for the rich and powerful. 85% think that the wealthy and big corporations are running the country. 67% think corporations are paying too little in federal taxes. And only 9% think they're paying too much. This, despite the fact that we've got this tax bill in the Senate right now. And 92% agree that there are already too many special tax loopholes for the wealthiest Americans, and 90% for corporations. So, although they don't understand the details, they don't understand those charts, they don't understand the history, they do believe that the rich are shafting them. And when we talk about policy, with that as the backup, their belief system is already with us, and that's why it's such popular legislation. That's why it works. The first one I list here is raise the minimum wage. The second one, this is very interesting. Paid sick leave is somehow seen by mainstream Democratic legislators and council members as tougher to achieve than minimum wage. But it's not. It is actually more popular than minimum wage, substantially more popular. In fact, you can hardly find anything that is as popular as requiring paid sick leave. And Dave, you've seen some recent polling.
Absolutely, and I think it's directly in line with what you said in the first segment. The reality is that there's more people generally in a jurisdiction, in a state, that don't have access to a single paid sick day than actually earn minimum wage, that there's actually just more people directly impacted. Like, I know the stats for my state, but I think it's pretty uniform across across jurisdictions across the country. And again, I think it's very simple. It's people just need to, think of how it relates to them. People are sometimes shocked that others don't have it. And then I think there's this other compounding effect that once people are presented, like restaurant workers generally don't have it, daycare workers generally don't have it, nursing home care workers generally don't have it. It is horrifying. And then it's coming back to, like, how is this good for me? Well, I prefer my food not being served someone who's battling the flu. I prefer my elderly parent not being cared for someone who's got bronchitis. My children being cared for someone who's got, can get her sick or me sick, for that matter. So it is overwhelmingly, we're seeing, again, across the country, it's the topic that polls in the high 70s, 80 percentile as an issue of support, which, to get those numbers, you are polling over large numbers. So in some cases, nearly 50% of Republican-leaning voters, which, again, weaponizes this issue in terms of drawing sharp contrast. You either support this, and if you don't support this, then what do you support in doing right by people? Particularly, you put in the context of what people already believe: the system's rigged, they're getting screwed, other people are benefiting, minimum wage, paid sick day, and some of these other issues you got listed here.
And, 40% of private sector workers and nearly 80% of low-income workers do not get any sick time at all. And it's just a gigantic issue. But at the same time, only a few states require employers to give paid sick leave. So almost every place can do this. Mm-hmm. And it's great politics.
Right. Yep, it's great politics, and the states that have been able to do this are your bluer states or states that have pushed it, and large localities that have pushed it to the voters of the people, because the people overwhelmingly support it. It is being blocked in more states at the local level by conservative politicians that are using their political power to prevent these measures from coming forward. Again, I think it's a great issue, easy to digest. And those who are in this work more in the political space, there's no reason why this is not being advanced at every state and every locality across the country, because there is absolutely no downside, and it puts our conservative opponents in defense mode, and there's no argument that moves them away from it.
Now I'm gonna talk about two things that are both of those are very common and everybody knows about them. These last two are very uncommon and very populist. They would work beautifully, but no one's trying it at the moment. The first is to disclose corporate taxes. Now, our individual taxes are confidential. They should be confidential. But corporations are not people, contrary to what Romney may think. And this legislation would disclose the key information that's on the first 2 pages of the tax return. That is, what's the overall income, what are the deductions, what are the credits, what's the total amount of taxes that they're paying. Because they're not paying their fair share. Everybody knows they're not paying their fair share, and if we disclose it, we could create a much better opportunity to get them to pay their fair share. The same thing is true of the last of these. It's disclosure of freeloading employers, which is employers who have many employees who get public assistance. So, for example, Walmart is rather famous for having a lot of their employees on Medicaid. Just disclose it, or disclose the top 50 employers in the state and how many people are on public assistance who are employees of those employers, and how much it's costing the state, so that people will recognize that there's a problem that needs to be solved. Both of these would be it's hard to imagine anybody being against either of them, really, other than the corporate lobbyists. Average people, it's just a totally populist economic argument to make, and people would say, yeah. Now I'm going to move to healthcare. The thing that is an area of opportunity is prescription drugs, because we didn't do much on prescription drugs while Obama was president, because he made a deal with the prescription drug companies not to go after them. Well, now we can go after them. The first thing is there's a legislation that was enacted in Maryland earlier this year to empower the Attorney General to go after drug companies for price gouging. And this is a direct attack on high prices for prescription drugs. When you take a poll, everybody thinks that drug prices are too high. Everybody thinks that the drug companies are making too much profits, that they're windfall profits. Nobody likes drug companies at all. basically. And it's just great politics. And you get most Republicans as well as all Democrats. The second is to end the gag rule that's imposed on many pharmacists. Now, this requires a little explanation. That's pharmacy benefit managers are the people who negotiate the prices on drugs, and then they execute the program with the pharmacists. And one of the things that they are doing is to tell the pharmacists that in order to participate with that particular insurance company, they cannot tell their customers when the customer could get the drug cheaper. They're not allowed to. If the customer said, "Can I get this cheaper?" they're allowed to answer, but they're not allowed to volunteer the fact that, you know, you could get this cheaper and here's how. So there are 5 states which have enacted legislation to prohibit gag rules on pharmacists. This has got to be one of the most popular things you could be for. I mean, who is on the side of the gag rule on their pharmacists? Nobody is. And then
call it the best prices on prescription drug act guarantee.
People are very upset about prescription drug prices. They have every reason to be, and anything you do is going to be popular. There's a more modest measure here, which is Maryland created a commission to review how to protect its people if the federal government overturns the ACA or any part of it. And it's worked very well, actually. They've come up with a number of ideas to protect citizens, and it's a modest thing that could be done in any jurisdiction. Pro-consumer legislation. While we don't normally think of consumer protection this way, really right now it's about computers. Consumer protection is protecting the users of the internet. There are 2 things that can be done. One is data privacy, and that is when these companies like Target lose all of our customer information and make it possible or probable that we're going to get ripped off by some identity theft, we can hold those companies to a standard. We can have basic standards that require them to protect the customer data in a way that's consistent with industry practice. That's one. The other is to limit ISPs, the internet service providers, from using customer data without people's permission. Now, the FCC in the Obama administration enacted a series of regulations to prevent ISPs from using data without permission. Trump overturned that. States can now step in and reimpose that with respect to their own residents. I can't imagine anybody being against that. This has got to be wildly popular to go after any of this internet foolishness. You know, the old saying is, you know, when you pay for something on the internet, that's the product. When you don't pay, you're the product. Well, you shouldn't just give away yourself as the product, and the law should protect you. Government reform. So again, as I said, people think that government is rigging the system. They don't understand that it's rich people who are getting government to rig the system. So you can't be, you have to be for government reform. You know, you're not attacking the government, but you're saying that we can make it better. One of the things is to end pay-to-play campaign contributions, and this is would not go over well with corporations, but you simply have legislation that says that you can't get a government contract if you've contributed to somebody running for office in that government. And that way, you just can't have pay to play. If you want to seek contracts or subsidies, don't contribute, which would be a good thing. The other is a job piracy ceasefire. Now, surely you know that governments try to steal employers from each other constantly, and this is terrible for everyone because not only is it bad for the government's budget because they lose money, not only is it bad for the taxpayers because they have to pay for it, but it's bad for everybody else who's a business that's competing against the one that's trying to get the special advantage, like Amazon. So Amazon's seeking to get some spectacular amount of money and tax benefits for a new headquarters. Well, anybody that's competing with them in any way, which pretty much is all businesses, don't get that subsidy. That's unfair to all other companies. So a job piracy ceasefire is simply you pass legislation that says that we will not poach employers from any other jurisdiction that signs the same agreement. And so 2 governments could sign it, or 4, or 10, or 100, or 1,000. It would never do harm, and it could do quite a bit of good, but at least you're trying. Environmental legislation. Now, I put together greenhouse gases and climate change action plans in this way. The reason why this is highly popular, it's not so much that it's going to score, in the 80s in a poll. What's going to score high politically is if you can force conservatives to show that they're climate change deniers. The fact is that people believe in climate change, and that the only people who don't believe in climate change are never going to vote for progressives, ever. So putting legislation out there that forces the opponents to essentially deny climate change is a good thing. One is to reduce greenhouse gases by a renewable portfolio standard requiring that a state or city have a certain percentage of their energy produced by clean energy by a certain date. But the other, which is simpler and also important and not done so much, and can be done in any size jurisdiction, is to just say, look, let's have a task force that studies how climate change is going to affect our state, city, county, town, so that we are prepared and we can plan. If we're Houston, we have to take care of the flooding problem. If we are in California, we have to be prepared for wildfires. If we're on the East Coast, we have to be prepared for hurricanes. If we're on any coast, we have to be prepared for rising sea level. So climate change is going to eventually affect every government. Make a plan now, have a task force study it now, and politically, it'll force the conservatives to be climate change deniers, and that'll be terrible for them politically. The other thing that can be done that is not really something that's going to grab the persuadables, but it's going to energize the base, is to mandate environmental justice. Things that are harmful to the environment are routinely placed in locations where there's high minority populations and high poverty, so that waste dumps and waste transfer stations and government facilities that pollute the air or the water and so forth, they are disproportionately in places that's going to hurt people who are more in poverty and more minority populations. So have an agency, create an agency that studies that and recommends how to fix it. And it's simply environmental justice, and is kind of natural. Now, abortion rights. People don't think of abortion rights as somewhere that you can, win votes, but you absolutely can. Right now, there is a serious chance that Roe v. Wade will be overturned. All we need is for one of the 5 justices who support Roe v. Wade to die, and the replacement's going to vote against Roe v. Wade. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, that doesn't mean that people can't have an abortion. It means that it's decided state by state. So right now, states that haven't already codified Roe v. Wade should write it into their law that you have an affirmative right to abortion. The thing about it is that Roe v. Wade is wildly popular. About 70% of Americans favor Roe v. Wade, and this is like across the country and across partisanship. So that if you frame the issue as yes or no on Roe v. Wade, abortion rights is tremendously popular. The only people who are against you are people who are never going to vote progressive ever. There's also things that can be done to energize the base in the abortion rights movement. One is to protect clinics from harassment, which is a terrible problem, and people are appalled by it when you raise it up. And the other is to insist on truth in abortion facts. There are these crisis pregnancy centers, which are places designed to lure people in fraudulently and tell pregnant women that abortion is dangerous and that it'll cause cancer, and basically to lie to women. And there are various ways to go after these crisis pregnancy centers, and we have 3 different model bills to address it. In the education space, there's a couple of things that you can do that's very popular. One is a student loan bill of rights. The problem with student debt right now is spectacular, tremendous amounts of student debt, and people are trapped for decades. There's a Connecticut legislation. The Student Bill of Rights is also passed in a couple other states now, which is on our website and is very popular. The other is that average people really are not on the side of standardized testing. They think there's too much standardized testing, and they'd like to cut it back. So we have a couple of different bills to limit standardized testing in K through 12 schools. One is to simply not allow them in grades K1 and 2, where they're not required by federal law. Just a few more of these, and then we'll finish this and go to questions. Highly popular criminal justice legislation would be to restrict criminal forfeiture. Even right-wingers don't like this stuff, where police are seizing people's money and assets and keeping them, even if they're never convicted of a crime, in some cases never even arrested. It's way over the top. It's a violation of everyone's freedom. And there are things that can be done to energize the base, like test all rape kits. There's unbelievable numbers of rape kits that are collected and never tested. You can require that in a jurisdiction of any size that has the law enforcement agency. And also, anywhere with the law enforcement agency, require electronic recording of all interrogations. It's absurd not to have electronic recording of all interrogations. It protects the innocent and helps prosecute the guilty. It's like such a no-brainer, and any jurisdiction that doesn't do it, it's crazy. And it can be used as a good issue, and one reason why it's such a good issue is that the first such bill for electronic recording of interrogations was sponsored and passed by then State Senator Barack Obama. It was the thing that made him respected in the Illinois legislature. On civil rights legislation, to energize the base, don't ask immigration status. This is a simple thing. The local, not just police, but any government official just doesn't ask unless it's absolutely required by some superseding law, so that people feel like they can report crimes, like they can be witnesses if they see a crime, like they can report violations of health and safety rules. It protects everybody. If immigrants feel afraid to report, it endangers everybody. And protect LGBTQ individuals from discrimination, which could be done in more than half the states, and the overwhelming majority of localities still need to pass such legislation. On the voting area, to promote voter registration to new residents, Seattle passed this bill which requires landlords to give a voter registration form and a page explaining it to anybody who is a new tenant. Because obviously when you move to a new place, you need to either register or change your registration with a new address. So it requires them to hand it to them, which makes perfect sense and doesn't hurt anybody and would help our side a great deal. And we have legislation specifically to protect voters from intimidation, which is there's not nearly enough legislation on that subject. And this is the last slide. These are things that they're just mild things that are just good ideas. One is to help nonprofits interact with government, because nonprofits provide a tremendous amount of the services to people in need, and they're always dealing with the government, and it's very difficult at times. The government should, any government, city, state, should have an office or an ombudsman whose job it is to make it as easy as possible for these social services nonprofits to succeed, to make it easier for them to deal with the government, to get through the red tape and so forth. It's entirely beneficial to government and to the beneficiaries of these programs and the participants in the nonprofits, and it would cost so little. Second is to prepare for an aging population. This is, again, essentially a study of how the aging of the population is going to affect your state, city, town, which, in just 20 years will affect you quite a bit. So that it's going to affect your schools, the social services you provide, the transportation options that you're going to have to provide. Make a plan now. And the third is to outlaw price gouging during emergencies. Most states have some kind of law that says that you can't price gouge during an emergency like a hurricane or a tornado or whenever there's a declared emergency. However, overwhelmingly, there's only a few states that do it well. We have model legislation that is modeled on the California standard that does a good job outlawing price gouging. And again, this would be wildly popular to the extent anybody, to the extent that it's publicized in any amount. So that's everything that I was going to lift up, but you'll all get access to the progressive agenda in a very short time, and there's 50 different policies that are featured. I've only talked to about half of them.
Right. And I think it's really important to recap before we take questions. Again, if you have questions, type them in the question bar or raise your hand and we would be happy to get to you. but I think it's important. It's important to realize. I mean, what's been presented here are fairly easy to communicate ideas that get to what Bernie was talking in the beginning about demonstrating that whose side you're on, who you're with, who you're fighting for, what you stand for, and that's really the nugget I hope everyone comes away with in the session. That can easily be synthesized to develop a platform. It can be easily synthesized to shape a public narrative about really what our public leaders should be addressing, what our units of government should be tackling, really defining the role of government to improve the conditions for all people and to make things better for all folks. And I think the simplicity in the few words that they can be used to describe, and no one would say go do necessarily all of these, but these are definitely, if you're in a position that you can actually advocate, all of these ideas should be being pushed, because it creates, you'll be able to get a sense of what things gain traction, particularly with persuadable voters. But the thing that fascinates me most about these is the dual purpose of persuading and activating our base simultaneously. So first question, I got a question here from Linda. In all of these ideas, something that I thought that she thought was missing was a conversation on infrastructure, roads, bridges, water, sewer. Bernie, you want to speak to that? Like, where does that fit in the context of all of this?
I think that that's a great issue, and it's just harder because it costs money. But people feel it. It would benefit them personally to have the infrastructure improved. The more specific you are about, this bridge and this road, the more effective it is as a political issue. I guess maybe it's not listed in here because it is something that works best when it is very specific to your jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm. And I would add, there is increasingly more and more research. Because people understand it, people overwhelmingly support investment in fixing roads. I think there's been, unfortunately, some national tragedies I talked about, like when infrastructure breaks down, and being in Michigan, the Flint water crisis is an example of that. But we see evidence of water, sewer infrastructure around the country, bridges, etc. That public infrastructure that's necessary to everybody, that people want that addressed, people want that prioritized, and they're willing to pay for it as long as you don't redivert that money and resources elsewhere. And so I think that's I think it definitely can be a compelling. I haven't seen maybe a specific polling on specific issues, but definitely those groups that really focus on infrastructure trying to bring attention by the lack of investment in our public infrastructure since World War II. Since the investment after World War II, I should say. So over the last 30 years, shows huge public support for it. But the question, Bernie, for me, that Linda raised, that immediately got me speaking to this conversation. We hear jobs, 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 jobs. We hear the Republican establishment trying to make the case that the reason we need to award these tax cuts for the rich is for jobs. And definitely people want more jobs around, and we're supportive of jobs. How do we respond? What's our answer to how we're going to be on the side of not only creating jobs, but the type of jobs that we want to create? So answer the jobs question, jobs in the economy question.
I think that we need to talk about creating a fair market system. It isn't large corporations that create jobs. It is demand from the middle class. It's people wanting to buy stuff. And so by our focus on increasing wages, increasing benefits, making average people's lives better, and at the same time making the market system fairer so that small business can compete against large business, and that there's not such a rigged system that benefits the rich and powerful over everybody else. That's what's going to drive the economy. That's what's driven the economy in the past, and that's what will drive it in the future. And I'd use as an example this tax bill that's in Congress right now. The big corporations have already said publicly that they're not going to use that money to create new jobs. They're going to keep it. That's the difference between us and the conservatives.
Right. Well, I think it's demonstrated also by the growth. I mean, the concentration of net worth, the growth of net worth in the wealthiest 1%, wealthiest 10% in this country. I mean, I think it's a complete demonstration of that. It's like they don't go and spend it. I think if just recently I just heard someone who was instrumental in the Reagan tax cut, who's basically come out and says this is arguably the worst thing you could be doing. That all the conditions for that are not even present here, and this is only going to result in greater deficits and a transfer of wealth to the wealthiest 1% in the country. I like the way that you talked about, if we talk about jobs, we talk about it as good paying jobs. We talk about trying to fix a rigged system. We talk about creating a fair marketplace and treating workers fair. I mean, really, I think, it is solid ground to be able to make that growth. And I think, frankly, if we couple, and the reason why it was the infrastructure question that I mentioned is that there is a direct tie to good paying jobs when we start investing in building more infrastructure. And there's, the connection there. So there is it got me thinking in those terms. When I often hear, whether it's candidates or public leaders talking about infrastructure, I don't know if I hear those connections as well as they could be, particularly in the framework that you outlined in this presentation. So great question, Linda. Thank you very much. I don't think I have any other additional questions here. Again, I put one final call out for questions, or if you have audio ability to ask your questions directly, type them in the question bar. We'd love to have them. But they don't come through. Why don't any closing remarks? And then again, maybe talk about when people can expect the progressive agenda as we move into 2018, and maybe reaffirm the key takeaways that every public leader, elected leader, every potential candidate in the future, every organizational leader, and how they should be advancing this stuff.
Yeah, I think that we're going to have the printed version of the progressive agenda in about 2 weeks, and we will be mailing it out before the first of the year so that everybody has it, that it's available in every state at the very beginning of 2018. If anybody wants a hard copy, just contact us and we will get it. If anybody would volunteer to pass out hard copies to other progressives, we would love that. Otherwise, it will be available as a PDF and as HTML text probably later this week, certainly by next week.
Excellent. And I think it's a great resource to figure out, what do we need to be talking about? What do we need to be fighting for? How do we use it? Some of the meat to help define that public narrative of what we stand for individually, what we stand for as collectively. What's the world that we want to create, and what's a fair, just, and moral world we want to create. And I think, I'll just close like that. What I love about this agenda and all the ideas that Bernie, listed here and that are also included in the full publication, is that it allows us to go into, this next cycle that we're in, with a clear answer. What do we stand for, and how are you going to make my life better? And it is something that I think all progressives need to take to heart and be much more intentional about putting into practice. So with that, we'll wrap up. Bernie, as always, thank you very much. And for our guests that have joined us today, please join us here, usually every couple weeks, to to engage in topics of policy, communications, and other leadership development to help help all of us be a little bit more effective in moving the needle in this country in the direction of progressive political positive change. See y'all next time. Thanks again, Bernie.
Thank you.